All right, good afternoon. The AAMC is pleased to welcome you to this webinar on Learn How to Prepare for the AAMC Preview Professional Readiness Exam. We are recording and we will make the archive available afterwards. We will email you when we post it. We muted all participant audio. If you need help, please send us a message. This presentation includes time for Q&A. You may submit a question at any time by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. It is now my pleasure to welcome Lauren Bowser.
Everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Just making sure everything's on here. Okay, great. So today we're going to talk about how to prepare for the preview exam. We're going to start with an overview of the exam, including discussing how to know if you need to even take it. Then we'll review what the test measures and review some sample questions. We'll also go over the AAMC's test prep resources and other information you need to know and review before test day. And after that, we're going to have time for your questions. So we're going to start with an overview. So what is the preview exam? We get asked that question all the time. The preview exam is a standardized multiple choice situational judgment test that assesses your understanding of effective professional behaviors. So the exam presents you with a series of hypothetical scenarios that you may encounter as a medical student. And it asks you to evaluate the effectiveness of different responses. And it's measuring your knowledge of effective and ineffective behaviors. And let's dig into this in a little more detail because that may not quite make sense. So let's start by reviewing the two main skill areas covered by the exam. They're personal accountability and relational skills. Personal accountability includes the qualities that will help you manage challenges, remain accountable, and grow through reflection and feedback. And relational skills reflect your ability to work effectively on teams, build relationships, and engage compassionately with patients and colleagues. To better understand what each skill area includes, this slide lists some sample behaviors that are associated with each of the skill areas. So as you look at the sample behaviors around personal accountability, you're going to see it's more focused on you and your ability to manage different situations. So like persevering in stressful situations or demonstrating ethical decision making. So things related to kind of you and how you handle things during different situations. Relational skills is more about how you relate to and work with others. So sample behaviors include seeking ways to resolve team conflicts or working collaboratively with others to provide effective patient care. So they're kind of different sides of things. So it's more yourself versus how you work with others. I want to briefly touch on how you've been developing these skills throughout your life. These are skills that you developed over time through things like working with a group on a project, maybe volunteering within your community, balancing your commitments between work and school. So you don't need to have specialized experience in medicine. While the scenarios within the exam often are described in the context of a potential medical school situation, they're relevant to the school skills needed to navigate general situations that occur in everyday life. So you've been developing those skills throughout your life, through your experiences. It's not specific to what you would look medical school specifically. And often we hear, and this was questions even that came in as part of signing up for this webinar, is people ask whether or not they have to take the exam. And to answer that question, you really need to know if the school that you're applying to is recommending or requiring the exam, or if they require that you take a situational judgment exam and the preview is an exam that will satisfy that requirement. So not all schools currently ask students to take the preview exam, but quite a few do. So you need to have a sense of where you're looking to apply and whether or not you need to take it. And we provide you some resources to help with this. So the preview website has a list of schools that use the exam in their admission process in the last application cycle, and a preliminary list of schools that have told us already that they're going to be using it in the next cycle. We're going to continue to update the list, and the updated information will be included in the MSAR guide, which will be published in April, and when AMCAS opens later in May. So we have some resources to help you figure out whether or not you're going to need to take the exam. We also get asked, when should you take the exam? And there's no single answer to this question because it's going to depend on a few things. But we've got a few things to consider as you make your decision. So first is the deadlines required for your application process. So that's going to be really important. Um, we also recommend that you think about your MCAT prep schedule. So if you still need to take the MCAT or you're planning to take it this spring or even the summer, think about what your prep schedule looks like for the MCAT exam. You do need to prep for the preview, and we're going to talk about how you do that, but it is much less time consuming than for the MCAT. So when you're thinking about preview and when you want to take it, just make sure how that fits in with what you're doing with your planned MCAT test date. Also, if you think you may want to have the opportunity to retake it after you receive your score, consider testing earlier in the year because that gives you more time to retake it if you need to. You can submit your AMCAS application and then take the preview exam. So just like with MCAT, you can indicate that you have a future preview exam scheduled, and your scores will automatically be sent to the AMCAS schools using preview once they are available. So that is something that's an option as you're doing your filling out your AMCAS applications. But if you're unsure about the timing, it's always best to check with the medical schools directly because they know how they're going to use the exam and when they're going to use the exam. So that is going to be your best resource for figuring that out. Okay, we've covered an overview of the exam and how to determine if you need it, but let's move on to the format of the exam and how to prepare. The testing time for the preview exam is 75 minutes. It is delivered online using a remote proctor. During the exam, you're going to be presented with a series of hypothetical scenarios like the one you see on this slide. And you're going to be asked to evaluate the effectiveness of a series of responses to that scenario. It's important to understand that you're not being asked what you would do. Rather, you're given a presented scenario, so a situation that could happen, and then you're given a series of different responses. And you must decide how effective or ineffective that response is. So for each scenario, there are multiple responses, and you will evaluate each one independently of the others. So throughout the exam, you're going to be asked to evaluate 186 responses. The format of the exam is pretty straightforward, but let's break down how it's scored, what is being measured, and how you can prepare. So let's talk about how it's scored. So each item, each response that you're asked to evaluate has an answer key. If your response matches the key, full credit is awarded for that question. If your response is one rating away from the key and on the same side of the scale, half credit is awarded. So that might be a little confusing. So let's walk through an example. In this example, you chose very effective as your answer. So let's start by breaking down what we mean by side of the scale. So first, effective and very effective, where your response is one side of the scale. And ineffective and very ineffective are the other side. So let's identify the key. So what was the full credit answer for this question? So the full credit, the key for this was effective. So if you had selected effective as your response, you would have received full credit for this question. But you elected very effective. So since very effective is one rating away from effective, and it's on the same side of the scale, you receive half credit for this response. If you had selected ineffective, which is also still one away from the key, you would not receive any credit because it's on the other side of the scale. So it's not super complicated, but it's just important to keep in mind that the two different sides of the scale and where full credit versus half credit is awarded. Since we covered how individual items are scored, I want to share the overall scoring for the exam. So your score report is going to include 3 key pieces of information. You're going to have a total score, and that's going to be a number ranging from 1 to 9. You're going to have percentile ranks, and percentile ranks are useful in helping you understand how you perform relative to others who took the exam. And then, like all standardized tests, there's a confidence band around the scores that's used to show the accuracy of your total score. Scores can be affected by many factors, so the confidence bands mark the ranges in which your true score likely lies. So confidence bands help signal the lack of precision in test scores and are intended to discourage distinctions between examinees with similar scores. So again, with most standardized tests, you're going to see something like that on a score report. And the information provided on your score report is the exact same information that's received by the medical schools when your scores are sent to them. So they get exactly the same thing as you're getting on that score report. Now let's review what the test is measuring and how to approach actually answering the questions. So earlier, we touched upon the two skill areas covered by the preview exam, and I shared a few sample behaviors. Now I want to break that down a bit more. The scenarios presented on the preview exam are linked to the professional competencies listed on this slide within each of the two skill areas. As you prepare, it's important to review and understand these competencies. The competencies and their definitions can be found in the preview examinee preparation guide and also on the preview website. So the QR code that's on your slide right here will take you to the page on the preview website that provides the full definitions for each of these competencies. So that's important to have that information to look at that. So their first step in preparing for the preview exam should be to review each of these competencies. And let's take a look at a couple of the definitions to understand kind of why they're important and how they're going to help you approach these questions. So the first one we're going to look at is commitment to learning and growth. And this is a personal accountability skill. And as you review the competency definition, pay attention to the key traits or behaviors that are associated with the competencies. So looking at this slide, key traits include reflecting on successes, challenges, and mistakes, pursuing opportunities to improve knowledge and understanding, ask for and incorporate feedback to learn and grow. The behaviors listed on this that define what this competency is, these are positive characteristics associated with this competency. So these are the things that show positive demonstration of the competencies within this definition. So let's look at another one. Teamwork and collaboration is a relational skill. And these competencies have to, as I talked before, these competencies have to do with your relationships and how you work with others. So someone who is demonstrating this competency effectively will collaborate with others to achieve shared goals. They're going to prioritize those shared goals. They're going to share information with team members and encourage this behavior. They're going to give and accept feedback to improve team performance. You're not going to be asked to identify the competency or provide a definition. So this isn't something that you need to memorize. But as you start reviewing practice questions for preview, it'll be helpful to keep in mind the positive behaviors that are associated with the competency, because that's going to help you consider whether the response you're seeing is effective or ineffective, because you need to be able to rate those responses. So understanding what positive behaviors are associated with it helps you figure out what's ineffective versus effective. So on this slide is a sample scenario from the preview exam. This scenario presents a situation, a conflict, or dilemma that you may encounter. The scenario will call upon your knowledge or understanding of one or more of these competencies we've been talking about. When taking the test, the first step is to read and understand the scenario. So I'm going to pause for just a minute to give you a chance to read this, because we are going to actually go through a couple of sample responses based on the scenario and rate them together. So take just a second to read through this, because we're going to come back to it. So I'm just going to pause for a second. Okay, I'm going to move on, but the scenario will be shown on the screen again when we get to the responses, so you can reread it then as well. Okay, understanding the definitions of the effectiveness level is important when deciding how to answer the question. So first, it's important to notice that one side of the scale indicates that the response will have a positive impact on the situation by helping or improving the situation. And the other side indicates a more negative impact, where the given response will not improve the situation and may even make it worse. So as you approach the questions, the first step you should the first step is you should be able to decide if this response is more likely to help or hurt the situation. Again, this helps you figure out which side of the scale, as we talked about before. So if it's going to more likely to help the situation, it's going to fall on the effective side. If it's not going to improve the situation and might even make it worse, it's going to fall on the ineffective side. So once you've determined the direction of the response, you then need to decide the level. And the definitions that are provided can help you make that determination so you can kind of see the degree of difference between the different ratings. It's going to take some practice to get the hang of it, but we have resources for you, and I'm going to get to those in just a minute. Tips for evaluating the responses. One, you need to make sure you read the scenario and the response carefully before rating the effectiveness of the response. And there's important things to consider when you're making this choice, because sometimes when students approach this test, they kind of make some mistakes or make some assumptions that lead them to kind of going down the wrong, going in the wrong direction with how to respond to things. So first, consider each response as an immediate next step in the scenario. So unless otherwise noted, it is something that happens immediately after it. Everything you need to evaluate the response is included in the scenario and the response itself. Do not assume anything beyond what is written in the scenario response. So in real life, obviously you have more context. If you're in there's a scenario where you're working with other students, maybe you have a history with those students, or there's a professor that certain things that they like that, could influence how in real life you might respond to that situation. But on the preview exam, all you have is the scenario and the response. So if in your real life experiences, things are more complicated, it doesn't matter for preview. You're just looking at the scenario, the response, and evaluating based on what's in front of you. Don't make any additional assumptions about things that could impact it unless it's in the content that you're provided. You need to evaluate and rate each response independently. Do not compare the responses to each other, and don't rank order them. You've got the range of very ineffective to very effective. It's not comparing each one, which one's the best, which one's the worst. No, each one independently. You're looking at each one separately from each other. And within a scenario set, each effectiveness rating can be used more than once or not at all. So not all scenario sets will include responses that reflect each effectiveness rating. So again, if you're going through the scenario set and you think, oh, I didn't have a very ineffective, if they didn't seem like you needed one, then that's, don't worry about that. You don't have to use each one each time. So again, review each one separately and consider it independent of the others. As in real life, there may be multiple ways to respond to a situation. The response that you think would be the best or the worst way to respond, so the most or least effective, may not be present. So what you would do may not be there. Each scenario set includes a sample of possible responses to the situation. So again, it's not based on what you would do or the best way to handle it. These are examples of the way it could be handled, and you're just rating them based on this effectiveness scale. So now that we reviewed how to evaluate the responses, let's go back to the scenario we reviewed and walk through a couple of responses and rate them together. Okay, so let's take this one step at a time. And this may be a little slow for some of you that are more comfortable with it, but I want to make sure everybody understands the process. So this is the response that you need to rate. So it says, tell your classmates that only the professor is qualified to provide feedback. So step one, let's decide which side of the expectedness scale this response should go on. So is this response more likely to help or improve the situation? So to help or improve the situation or not? So let's take a poll to see what you think. So if we could put the first poll up. So is this response more likely to improve or not improve the situation? So if it's going to improve it, it means it's going to be either effective or very effective. If it's not going to improve it, it's going to be either ineffective or very effective. So if everybody could put in their responses, and when it looks like we have a good number that have come in, we can go ahead and show the results. Not improve. So good. That is correct. So yeah, so we know that this response is not likely to improve. So because of this, we know that this is either going to be ineffective or very ineffective. Um, so let's do the next part and decide. So between the two responses that we have here, is this going to be ineffective or very effective? Let's put the second poll up and see. And once we have a good number that have responded, we can go ahead and show the answer of what people said. So it was torn. People were torn between it. So it is a little tricky. But it looks like the majority of the people said very ineffective. So let's see what let me close this. Hold on one second here. And the key for this response was ineffective. So the response will not improve the situation. So we're all in line there that will not improve the situation and may cause a problem. So from a student perspective, you know that the feedback from the professor is important, but you also know that you need to take a classmate's feedback into consideration and maybe even use it as a learning opportunity that could improve your performance. Further, this response communicates to your classmate that their feedback's not important. So if you kind of ignore what they're saying, you're communicating that to them, and that could create challenges with them in the future. So while this response doesn't improve the situation, and it may cause a problem, it doesn't go to that level. So the difference in the definitions between the effective and the very ineffective, or ineffective and very ineffective, was whether it may cause a problem or it would definitely cause a problem. And in this one, it's possible it would, but it's not super clear. That's not definite that it would. And again, there's nuance to this. And again, so as you do practice questions, you will start to become more comfortable with that nuance of where this was at. But if you did put very ineffective, you would have gotten partial credit on this, but ineffective was the key for this particular response. Okay. So let's do one more quickly. So on your own, I want you to think about the steps that we took. So in this one, you're going to explain to your professor that you understand you missed some opportunities during the exercise, and you're going to discuss how to improve. So if we could put that poll up, we're just going to go ahead and rate it between all of the different answer choices and pick which one you think it would be. And once we have enough, we can go ahead and show the answers. Very effective. So we have a little bit of a mix here, but the majority of the people had it on the positive side of the scale. So effective or very effective, with most people choosing very effective. And let's see what the key says. And the key for this is very effective. So this response indicates that you have acknowledged your classmates' feedback and that you're using that feedback as a starting point in a conversation with your professor. So this shows your desire to learn and improve your performance in the future, which is our positive behaviors associated with the competencies we've talked before. So we consider this very effective because it's aligned with the competencies, it's aligned with those positive behavior, and this response is a response that will improve the situation as you're working with your professors and understanding that feedback. So that's a little tricky. And again, there is some nuance in answering those questions. So practice is really important. And again, spending time with those competencies is also important to be able to be comfortable with the different definitions. And we do have resources to help you practice to get comfortable with not only the format of the test, but even the description. So to understand the thinking behind which of those answer choices is the right way. So I'm going to go walk you through some of the resources that we have available to you and some recommendations for how to use them. So new this year, we now have a full-length scored preview practice exam that's available for purchase. This practice exam can be taken online through the MCAT Prep Hub, so the same place that you access all of your AAMC MCAT prep materials. The preview practice exam will live in that same hub and can be accessed there. When you take the exam, it's going to provide you with a total score and percentile rank, just like the actual exam. It's a full-length exam. It has scenario sets for a total of 186 responses, and it's going to use that same 4-point effectiveness scale that we just walked through in these sample questions. Once the exam's completed, you're going to be able to go through and review all of your questions and see the rationales or the explanations that explain the scoring key and the responses. But for this online scored exam, you will get a total score like you would receive on the real exam. In addition to the new scored practice exam, we continue to offer 2 free practice exams for preview that are available in a PDF format. So just like the scored practice exam, these practice exam booklets, because they're PDFs, they're still a full-length exam. They have scenario sets and a total of 186 responses for you to rate using that 4-point scale. The PDFs have a scoring key for all the responses and provide rationales that explain the key for each response. You're not going to get a score with the PDF practice exams, but you will have the ability to practice going through those questions and evaluating how your response compares to the key and, again, the explanations. We also provide an exam preparation guide with additional tips for preparation. So, and all of these resources can be found on the AAMC preview website. Reading the Preview Essentials Guide is a required step when preparing to take the exam. This document is the official policy and procedure guide, and the information within is necessary for a smooth registration, testing, and score reporting experience. This is where you'll find detailed information on ID and name requirements, deadlines, fees, and more. The Preview Essentials, along with additional information for test day, can be found on the preview website. So definitely make sure as you're getting ready to take the website or take the test, you read the essentials and look at the other information available on the website on what you need to know for test day. We've covered quite a bit of material. So before I move on to the AAMC resources and we get to Q&A, because I'm sure there are a lot of questions coming in, although I haven't looked at them yet, I want to provide a quick summary of the steps to prepare for the preview exam, including the materials that I've talked about. So first, you want to become familiar with the competencies and the key behaviors that define them. So spend some time reading them, and they're not long. So don't think of this as like learning all the organic chemistry on the MCAT. Become familiar with those key competencies and key behaviors. Review the info on the information on the preview prep website or in the preview examinee preparation guide to learn what the exam measures. It's a lot of what we covered, but there's a little more details in there. Understand how to differentiate between the effective levels, read those definitions, and get tips on how to evaluate the responses. Complete one, or preferably both, of the PDF practice exams and compare your scores to the scoring key. Focus on understanding the rationales and how they align with the behaviors described or defined through those competencies. And we recommend taking these timed. If you don't do both timed, at least do one of them timed, so you get used to the number of questions you're going to have and the time you have. But we recommend doing those unscored PDFs first to get comfortable with the test and the question types. Next, we recommend taking the scored practice exam, using what you learned with your experience from taking and reviewing the PDF practice exams. Be sure to review your results and pay special attention to questions you got wrong or where you received half credit. And last, you want to make sure you're ready for test day. So again, read the Preview Essentials Policy and Procedure Guide and watch the Preview Test Day Experience video because this is an online remote proctored test. So make sure you're comfortable with what the test day is going to look like for you. And before we move on to questions, I want to review quickly the resources that AAMC makes available to you. Again, most of the stuff I've already talked about, but wanted to just walk through this. Again, preview essentials, can't mention it enough, really important to make sure that you don't have any issues on test day. Goes to the policies, procedures, all the requirements. Test day experience videos, helpful to make sure that you understand what's going to happen on test day with remote proctoring. We have 3 full-length practice exams and the examinee preparation guide, which includes much of the information that I've talked about today. And while the preview exam does not require the content knowledge you need for a test like the MCAT, we do recommend that you spend time preparing for the exam. The goal of these resources is to help you become familiar with the format and the structure of the exam, understand the competencies that preview assesses, and then practice answering exam questions to make sure you're ready for test day. So this isn't going to be a months-long process of preparing for the preview. It's, it's more days, maybe a couple of weeks at the most. It's not a huge amount of work, but if you walk into that test unfamiliar with the with the exam questions, haven't practiced some scenarios, you're more likely to be tripped up. This is a test where being familiar with the test format is really going to benefit you on test day. So in addition to the preview resources already discussed, please check out the pre-med resources page on the AAMC website. You'll find a calendar of pre-med events and guidance on how to apply through AMCAS and Finance Medical School. You'll also find the recorded webinars for many topics, including preview registration. So earlier this year, we had a webinar talking about the preview registration process. That recorded webinars there. We also have information on the fee assistance program and preparing for the MCAT exam. So lots of information available there. And one thing I mentioned, the scored practice exam for preview, it is available for purchase in the AAMC store. If you have applied for and received the fee assistance benefits, that practice exam is provided to you at no cost, just like the MCAT test prep products for. So if you're fee assistance, if you've received the fee assistance benefits, you will receive that scored practice exam as part of that benefits that you receive as part of that program. If you have questions, please use the contact information on the slide to reach out to the preview team. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dawn, who's going to help us with the questions that have been coming in.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. Hi, everybody. Um, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for all the questions you've submitted. These have been great. And thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dawn Smith. I'm from Outreach and Engagement here at the AAMC. I will be moderating the Q&A today, and I'm also going to bring Michelle Sparacino, our Director of Test Administration, on to join us to answer some questions. We've been getting some great questions throughout. So, Michelle, I'm going to have you answer our first question, which is, can you talk a little bit about the differences between the preview exam and Casper?
Oh, happy to. So I think there are four or five different differences that I'd like to highlight. The first is the competencies. The competencies that we're targeting are those that are recognized as important for students who are applying to medical school or even really any health profession, rather than more general social intelligence kinds of competencies. So there's a difference in how the exam was designed. The format of the exam is different too. The format of our, as you saw today, is different from Casper. Casper has written responses and video responses, and ours is not structured. The preview exam is not structured that way. We've formatted the exam the way we do because it helps ensure that we're testing only the competencies that we're intending to test, and not other skills like writing or speaking, which are not part of the competencies that we are testing. Also related to the format of the exam, it allows us, because we're ensured of the validity of the exam, we also have determined or able to establish that the exam is reliable. And that reliability is really important for a number of reasons, but as well as it allows us to make sure that the scores mean the same thing across time. So that allows you to decide whether or not you want to retest if you decide you have to be, if you're applying in a future test application year, or you need to reapply to school. If you're satisfied and you've already taken the exam, if you're satisfied with the score, you don't have to retake it. But if you want to retake it, you can. If the scores weren't reliable, then we would need to have you retake the exam every time you applied to school. Related to scoring, all of the scoring is done by professionals who have extensive experience working with medical students, and they understand the situations they experience during their training. So the students are involved in developing the scenarios, not the scenarios themselves, but identifying the types of situations that they experience in medical school. And then we have faculty, staff, the student affairs staff, a diverse group of staff who are, and by diverse, I mean from all the different types of positions that you could have in a medical school that have experience with medical students and rating and grading students. They are involved in the scoring of not the development of the exam and the scoring of the exam. And then finally, the other difference is the score reporting. The information that we provide to students is the same exact information that we provide to schools. So there's no difference in the score reporting information that we provide to examinees and to schools. What you see is what the school sees and vice versa. Additionally, for score reporting, the score reporting is fully covered in your exam fee. So you can use your score, send it to as many schools, and there are no additional fees when you're sending it to additional schools or applying to additional schools. And then again, if you happen to be one of the 25% of people who have to reapply in a future application year, if you don't retake the exam, you can keep using the previous score, and you don't have to pay to resend it again. So that can be of great value to preview examinees as well. So those are the main differences between the preview exam and the Casper exam.
Michelle, we have a few questions about if the preview scores will appear on your AMCAS application, or will the scores only be shown to the schools that require and recommend it?
So all scores are uploaded into the AMCAS application. And the schools that will receive it will be those that you apply to who are listed as participating in the preview program. So that means any school that's requiring, recommending, but also in the exploring category. We have schools that are in the exploring category because they're they want to receive the scores so they can conduct some analyses, so they can figure out how they're going to use the scores in their decision and review of applications for a future testing year. But if they're in the exploring category this year, they will receive your score, but they will not actively use your score in their decision process about your application. So all of those schools who are in any of those categories will receive your score. We have a number of schools that are in none of those categories. They're not considered participating at all. They will not receive your score. Even if you select them to apply to the school, they won't receive your score.
And I see we have some questions about where to register and how to register, asking about limited seating for dates and times of registration. I do want to note two things. First of all, you can find all of that information on our preview website as well. We have a webinar that we recently did about how to register for the preview exam. If we can possibly post that link, because we have that posted on our website as well as on our preview YouTube playlist. So I don't know if we can put those in the chat. Oh, am I frozen? I think I'm frozen. We have the links of those available that maybe we can post in the chat. But all that information is on our website as well. Um, but yes, the seats are limited to for each exam. So you do want to make sure you get registered because the
Uh,
seating is limited.
Yeah, I'll add to that that the exam, the testing window that will be most full will be June. So if you do think that you'll test in June, I would recommend registering sooner rather than later because that while seating is limited in any exam window for the most part, most windows will have availability, but June will sell out.
Okay.
Was there any? Oh, never mind. Sorry. You didn't ask that question.
Okay. Hold on just a moment. Okay. This one's for Lauren. Lauren, can you talk a little bit about the best way to differentiate between effective and very effective and ineffective and very ineffective?
So I think the big keys is really to look at it's the definitions associated with it. So let me just put it in front of me real quick while I'm talking about it. So, with um, uh, it's again, don't look at the words associated with it. So like a very ineffective is the response will cause additional problems or make the situation worse. So it's really clear that this is something that is absolutely going to make it's going to cause more problems and it's going to make it worse. So it's an absolute, it's a definite that this is something bad that you would do. The ineffective is it's not going to make it better. So, if you do this, it's not going to make the situation better and it may cause a problem. So that's kind of the nuance there. Again, with effective and very ineffective, it's, for effective, this response could help, but it's not going to significantly improve the situation. So if you've got a response where it's like, okay, this isn't going to cause any harm, but it's probably not going to make things better. Or it's not going to make a necessarily good impression. So thinking about, the example we had with like the professor where you're meeting with them and you say, I know I missed some things and can you give me some tips? That's probably going to make a good impression on your professor because you're being proactive and you're listening to feedback and you want to improve. So that was very effective because the response is going to significantly improve. It's going to have a definite positive improvement on the situation. So again, it is nuanced, and the way the key is developed, it's kind of consensus based. So those subject matter experts are evaluating it and defining that key. So I think somebody put in the chat, it feels a little more subjective. It is a little more subjective. It's not like an MCAT question where it's just right or wrong. It is a little more subjective. So that's, again, why we recommend doing the practice and becoming more familiar with the nuances associated with it. But looking at those definitions and kind of understanding, where the difference in the wording is with it might make it better, it might cause a problem versus it will improve, it will make it worse. And that's, I think, where the distinction is. And you have to practice going through and trying a bunch of different practice questions is going to be important to kind of get that nuance. And it's tricky. There's ones that are more clear than others, and it's going to be a little more. It's not as cut and dry as maybe the kind of exam you're used to, and that's intentional because it's really trying to understand. It's again, it's not about what you would do. It's about your level of understanding of what's effective and ineffective.
Okay, Lauren, while we have you, can you talk about the practice resources that are available free of charge for those that are participating in the fee assistance program?
So the PDF exam practice exam booklets, those are free for everybody. So those anybody can go to our website and download those practice exam booklets. Again, you will not get a score. There's no way to get a score from those, but you can see for every single question what the key is, and based on your understanding of full credit and half credit, you can see, does your response align with the key? Would you have gotten half credit, or were you on the wrong side of the scale? So you can make that determination from that. For the scored practice exam, which is the newest product that we just launched, and it's available for purchase for $20. If you qualify for the fee assistance program, you will receive that as part of your benefits package. So if you have been approved for the fee assistance program, you will have access to that scored practice exam at no cost.
Okay, great. We're getting some questions about how long it takes to get the score. Want to talk about that?
Yeah, I can
The
take that
scoring
one.
process?
The scores are delivered between 30 and 35 days after the testing window. So about a month later. And it only varies because of, there might be a weekend or a holiday thrown in there, but.
Okay. Michelle, can you also talk a little bit about some general requirements for taking the exam, where the logistics about maybe on your computer and things of that nature?
Well, that's a long answer,
Long
so I'll
question.
just give some highlights. You're eligible I'll start with just eligibility to take the exam. You have to be intending to apply to a health profession, and you have to attest to that when you register for the exam. You have to be testing from an approved location. So we do test, you can take the test all around the world, but there are a handful of countries from which you cannot test. So I recommend you taking a look at that. And you will be using your own computer to take the exam, or you might use a work computer or another computer that you reserve, but you should test it beforehand to make sure that there are no firewalls that are going to prevent you from accessing the exam, and that all of the settings are optimized to take the exam. And sometimes when you're taking it on work or school computers that are not your own personal computer, sometimes those can be barriers. So you really should take the time to check that out. We do have what we call a tested out feature, which allows you to make sure whatever computer you're using, whether it's your own or another's, that it does meet the specifications for taking the exam. You have to make sure that you're testing from not just approved country, but a location that's set up in a private space that isn't going to be accessible by others while you're taking the exam, either physically or even visually. So we do have some we do have, um, uh, for lack of a better phrase, some do's and don'ts on our website that give you examples of acceptable workstation setups versus those that you should avoid. We have all of the specifications for computer equipment on our website as well. I hope that generally answered the question. I did see that somebody asked if they were reserving a room, like in their library, how long should they reserve it for? Generally speaking, I would reserve it for 3 hours. The exam time itself is 75 minutes. Most people are, by the time they log on, they check in, they take the exam, they check out. It's about an hour and 15 minutes for the session. But if you have any trouble logging on, if you want to test your equipment one more time beforehand, if there are times when there could be glitches during the exam, and by that I mean maybe your connectivity, uh, uh, maybe there's some challenge with your connectivity or some problems checking in. You want to make sure you have a little bit of buffer so that you have some time to resolve those issues in case they happen. They don't happen every time, but you don't want to be getting kicked out of the space that you reserved because something like that happened and you're still working on your exam.
Lauren, can you talk a little bit about how, if you're going to retake the test, how to improve your performance as you're studying and working on practice tests?
So I think it's important if you're retaking it to just really spend some time. Again, I would go through the competencies again, looking at the competencies and those definitions and what are those behaviors that are positive. Because again, as you read the scenarios and you read the responses, those responses align with a behavior in one of those competencies. So if you see that that behavior is aligned with the positive competency definition, it's more likely to be on the effective side. So I would spend some time reviewing that. I would also think about some of the tips that we've provided around how to approach the questions and kind of if you've taken the test already, what was your mindset? Like I've seen, in questions submitted saying like, oh, I struggled with it because none of the things were the things I would do. And it was so like, again, you got to get out of that mindset of like what you would do or which one is the best. It's think of yourself as like a third party person watching something happen and then you're asked was that good or was that bad. That's how you're looking at it. So I would say definitely go through the practice products, go through those practice questions, looking at the answer and spending time. Anytime you got, if your answer was on the wrong side of the scale, just really trying to understand why did you think this was, if it was something that was determined a negative response and you thought it was a positive, why? What are the differences in how you interpreted that versus what the key says? So I would definitely spend some time looking at the questions and reviewing them. If you did the other practice exams already, I would do them again. So make sure that none of the answers, try them again and work through that. And then the score practice exam is all new content. We haven't released that before. So I would spend some time doing that review before you go to that scored practice exam. But again, trying to figure out like where the disconnect is and did you spend time looking at those competencies and understanding what a positive behavior associated with them is, because that if you felt like you were on the wrong side of the scale multiple times, there's a disconnect there somewhere, so that may be helpful to spend time with those definitions to understand it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going through these. Mm. Michelle, do you want to talk at all a little bit about the timing of the exam in relation to the application cycle?
Is there a
We've got some questions about submitting when students are planning to take the exam and submitting their applications. Several different questions. So can you talk a little bit in general about that?
Sure. So we do test April through October, so the first exams are coming up soon. I think how shall I answer that? The um, I think the things to keep in mind are well, let me put it this way. So I'm going to answer this in relation to the AMCAS application because that's what most of the people taking the exam are going to use to apply to school, though not everybody. So you have to, I mean, one of the things to consider that is, what your application deadlines are and whether or not the school is on rolling admissions, because some of them are going to be reviewing applications as they come in, and others are going to wait until a certain time and then they're going to start reviewing applications. So when you get your score in is a little bit dependent on that along with the application deadlines. So that's information that you're going to have to be aware of as you're taking the exam. And of course, you're going to want to think about that in relation to whoever is going to be on the whichever application is going to be on the earlier end of that whole cycle, the deadlines and when and what kind of process they're using for reviewing applications. But with that said, a little information in relation to the exam times and then the AMCAS application. So the AMCAS application is going to open for you to start entering the information in May, and you'll be able to submit it. Uh, I actually forgotten exactly when you can start submitting. If somebody else on this knows that answer, I do this every year and I've forgotten that. But we don't start, but then once you start submitting, we need time to start verifying. The AMC staff needs time to start verifying those applications. So I do know that applications for AMCAS don't start going out to the schools until verified applications until toward the end of June. So if you're taking and if you decide you want your score with your application at the time, and you're one of the earlier applicants, and many people are, and you want your preview score along with your application once we start sending scores, applications to schools, then you're going to want to take the exam in April or May. If you take it in June, your score is going to be available very soon after that. It'll be available in July. So even if we start sending applications down to the schools in late June, almost July, really, and you don't take the exam until June, and your score is going to be available just really a couple of weeks later, a few weeks later in July. So that's a good time to take it too. And I will say that nearly half of the students who will take, or applicants who will take the exam for this application cycle are going to take the exam in June, and that's why June gets full. But then we have another lots of thousands of applicants who are examinees who take the exam July through October as well, because maybe they're applying to other schools that have sort of later application cycles or don't start reviewing reviewing the applications until later in the year. So I hope that gave you some idea of the way to think about when you should take the exam in relation to your application, and when you hope the school hope to have a complete application, especially if you're applying to a required school, and when they might be reviewing it.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. All right, we have just a few minutes left. So we have just a couple questions. Question, we wanted just to make sure that preview scores don't expire if they are applying the following year.
That is correct. They don't expire the following year. Now, a bigger question than that or the longer term question of that is that do they ever expire? Right now, any score that you've earned will be on your score report. So, for example, if you're one of those folks who took it back in 2020 when we first launched the exam, that score will be on a score report if you happen to be sending it now. But and from AMC's perspective, they don't expire. The schools, however, might determine at some point that they don't want to see a score over a certain age. No school, to our knowledge, has done that yet. But like for the MCAT exam, many schools don't want to see a score that's over 3 years or 5 years old, depending on the score, depending on the school. That really hasn't happened yet with the preview exam, but I do want to put it out there that one day it could. But from 1 year to the next, no, that they won't expire. And that's one of the advantages of taking the preview exam. As I mentioned earlier, when you were asking about differences between our exam and another exam, is that our score, if you take it this year, the score will be good for next year and you don't have to retake it again if you're applying again next year, or that's when you decide to apply for the first time and you're happy with your score. You can just send it.
Okay. And then, so you can take the test multiple times. I know we've established that. Can we quickly just go over the testing limits on the exam?
Yes, you can take it twice within 1 year and 4 times altogether.
Okay.
4 times in a lifetime.
Okay. Someone has asked if you can write on paper during the exam.
only if you have a special accommodation for that. So if you have a medical condition or disability, and that is an approved accommodation for that, then yes, but you will be taking the exam at a testing center and not online. And not but, it's really an and. And that will be a requirement that we have you test in a testing center. But if you don't have an accommodation, you cannot use paper.
Okay. All right. And we are just at time. We want to thank everyone for joining us today. Please go to the preview website for any additional questions you have. We will be sending out this recording within the next day or so. Again, thank you so much for joining us. You can also check out our preview playlist for our previous webinars, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks so much. And Dante, we'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, please give us your feedback on today's presentation by filling out the evaluation that will pop up on your screen as soon as we end. We recorded this session and we will email you when we post the archive. On behalf of the AAMC, have a wonderful day.